Hello, I'm Jonathan from Boom Instructor Training. Should you instruct or coach your pupils? The answer is you should do both. So on this video, I will be helping you understand these two different methods of teaching. Before this, just a quick reminder, on my website you will discover some amazing Part 2 and Part 3 video tutorials. You will significantly increase your chances of passing these tests by learning from these excellent video tutorials. They are really helpful. Let's get back to the topic of instructing and coaching. Instructing and coaching are two different approaches to teaching. Instruction is a more traditional approach where the PDI or ADI imparts their knowledge to the pupil by telling them what to do. Coaching, on the other hand, is a more interactive approach where the ADI helps their pupils to learn by asking questions and encouraging their pupils to develop their own skills and abilities. Instructing and coaching are both effective methods of teaching, so ADIs should either instruct or coach depending on the pupil's experience, ability, and the driving situation at the time. Instruction provides your pupils with a clear focus on what they need to do. They can simply follow your instructions, and this will help develop driving skills, especially in the early stages of learning. Instruction is often needed for risk management. Sometimes you simply have to tell your pupils to brake or tell your pupils to steer away from a parked car. So if there is an immediate risk to road safety, you can't be wasting time asking questions. You just need to tell your pupil what to do. So instruction is sometimes required to keep a lesson safe. However, instruction, if overused, can lead to rote memorization rather than critical thinking. In other words, pupils become reliant on you telling them what to do rather than being able to make their own decisions. The most effective learning takes place when pupils solve their own driving problems. If you work something out for yourself, you never forget how to do it. Whereas if someone tells you how to do something, it might go in one ear and out of the other. This is why, as ADIs, we should, wherever possible, coach our pupils, encouraging our pupils to solve their own driving problems. This is achieved by asking questions. In my experience, one of the main benefits of coaching a pupil is that they will show improvement more quickly compared to being instructed. With coaching, you will have longer conversations at the side of the road exploring driving problems, which will result in a deeper level of understanding. Therefore, when driving practice resumes, the pupil will show improvement quicker because of this deeper level of understanding. When only instructing a pupil to deal with a driving problem, it might require several practice attempts to correct a fault, going through a process of trial and error, one practice after another, until the pupil eventually gets it right. In contrast, by using coaching questions and exploring driving problems at the side of the road, you will help your pupils thoroughly understand their driving problems, the causes of the problems, the risks of the problems, and the remedies to their problems. When driving practice resumes, the pupil is more likely to correct their driving problems, only requiring 1, 2, or 3 practice attempts compared to needing 4, 5, or 6 practice attempts if they were being instructed. And this is because the pupil has a full understanding of what went wrong and how to correct the problem. To be an effective ADI coach, you must fully understand the learning outcome. In other words, you need to know precisely what you are trying to help your pupil achieve, and then ask appropriate questions to help your pupil understand how to achieve this learning outcome. Let's use an example. Imagine it's a foggy morning and your pupil is driving in fog for the first time. This is a new learning opportunity. The learning outcome is for your pupil to understand how to adapt their driving to manage the risks when driving in fog. Of course, you could just tell your pupil, read from a list of things your pupil should do when driving in fog, but this will probably be boring for the pupil and they might not be properly listening. On the other hand, if you ask some well thought out questions and direct your pupil's thinking towards the desired learning outcome, then the pupil will find this more interesting, will be more engaged, and consequently will be more likely to take everything on board. An ADI needs to put some thought into what the main learning points are. Let's say there are 4 main learning points regarding driving in fog. Number 1, to reduce speed. Number 2, to increase following distance. Number 3, to make sure the lights are on. Number 4, to open windows and listen for traffic at junctions. Of course, you could go into more detail than this, but you can always cover any further ideas on the move as and when they become relevant. You want to avoid information overload. So if you were to just tell your pupil about these 4 learning points, they might not be listening properly and they might not take on board what you are saying. However, by asking questions and encouraging your pupil to think for themselves, they are more likely to be engaged and interested and more likely to understand the learning outcome. Let's consider an example of a coaching discussion between an ADI and a pupil. The learning outcome is for the pupil to understand how to adapt their driving to manage the risks when driving in fog. So the purpose of this first part of this discussion is for the ADI to help the pupil to understand the need to reduce speed. So the ADI could start off by saying to the pupil, "Tell me about the weather." And the pupil would say, "Well, it's a bit foggy." And the ADI could then follow up with a question. "Yes, it is. So what are the risks when driving in fog?" Well, the pupil will think about this and maybe say something like, "Well, I can't see very well." And then the ADI could follow this up by saying, "Well, give me an example of how this could cause you a problem." So the pupil would think and then give a response and could say something like, "Well, I might not see a car pulling out of a junction." So then the ADI would follow this up by saying, "Well, if it's more difficult to see hazards, how can you adapt your driving to manage this risk?" So the people would think about this and then may respond along the lines of, "Well, should I drive more slowly?" And then the ADI would respond to this, "Yes, that's a good idea," and then follow this up with another question. "What's the advantage of driving more slowly?" The pupil will think about this and then give a response. Perhaps the pupil might say, "Well, if I drive more slowly, it will be easier to slow down and stop when I see a hazard." So then the ADI could respond to this by saying, "Yes, that's a good answer," and then follow up with another question. So considering the poor visibility today, when you are driving on a 30 mile per hour road, what do you think a safe speed would be? And the pupil would think about this and give a response. 20 miles per hour? And then the ADI can reply to this. "Yes, that's a good idea." So this initial part of the discussion has achieved the first learning point, which was for the pupil to understand the need to reduce speed. So now the pupil understands this. So now the pupil understands the need to reduce speed. So the ADI would then move the discussion forwards to help the pupil understand the need to increase following distance. So the ADI could start this discussion off by saying, tell me your thoughts about your following distance when driving in fog. And then the pupil would have a little think about this and could respond by saying, well, would I need a bigger following distance? And the ADI would respond to this by saying, yes, why is that? And the pupil could respond by saying, well, just in case the car in front brakes hard. And the ADI could then say, yes, and why might the car in front brake hard? So the people would think about this and then give a reply along the lines of, well, because it's foggy and the driver in front might not notice a hazard and brake late. So the ADI would respond to this and say, yes, that could happen, and then follow this up with another question. So you normally have a 2-second following distance in good weather. What should the following distance be in fog? And the pupil could think about this and then perhaps say, I don't know, maybe 4 seconds. And the ADI would then give a reply and say, yes, that's a good idea. So now, by having this discussion, the pupil now understands the need to increase following distance and understands by how much. So now the ADI would move the discussion forwards and help the pupil understand the need to make sure the lights are on when driving in fog. So the ADI could start off this part of the discussion by saying, it's important other drivers can see you. What are your thoughts about this? And then the pupil would think about it and perhaps say, well, I would need to turn the lights on. And the ADI could reply to this and say, yes, that's right. Which lights do you need to turn on? The pupil would say, well, the fog lights. And then the ADI would respond to this and could say, let's imagine the pupil has got a little bit of experience in terms of turning the lights on, because on previous lessons, the ADI and pupil has gone through the show me, tell me questions, which requires an understanding of the lights. So the ADI could say, yeah, so we discussed how to turn the lights on when we went through the show me, tell me questions. Can you remember how to turn on the dipped headlights and how to turn on the fog lights? And for the purpose of this example, let's imagine the pupil can remember. So the pupil says, yes, I can remember how to do this. And then the ADI would then follow this up and say, okay, that's great. Well, when the fog clears, what are your thoughts about the fog lights? And the pupil would think about it and say, well, would I need to turn them off? And the ADI could ask, yes, why is this? And the pupil would think about it and say, well, is it because they could dazzle other drivers? And the ADI would just reply to this and say, yes, that's correct, and especially so if driving in the dark. So now the pupil understands the third learning point, which is to make sure the lights are turned on so other drivers can see you. Now the ADI can move the discussion forwards onto the fourth learning point, which is to help the pupil understand that they can open a window and listen for traffic at junctions. So the ADI could start off this part of the discussion by saying, when you arrive at a give-way junction, if you can't see very well onto the major road because of the fog, what could you do to increase your awareness of traffic on the major road? So let's imagine the pupil has a little think and then says, well, I don't know. So the ADI could then follow this up by giving the pupil a prompt, and the ADI could say, well, your sight is restricted due to the fog. What other sensors do you have as well as your eyesight? So the pupil could think about this and say, well, my hearing. And the ADI could then ask another question. Yes, so how could this help? And the pupil would think about it and say, well, I could listen for traffic. And then the ADI could follow this up with another question. What could you do to increase your chances of hearing traffic? And the pupil would think about this and say, well, could I open the windows? And the ADI would say, yes, that's a really good idea. So now the pupil understands the fourth learning point, which is to open the windows and listen for traffic at junctions. So that was a nice example of a coaching discussion. The ADI had thought about the learning outcomes and asked questions encouraging the pupil to think for themselves. Therefore, the pupil now understands the risks when driving in fog, and the pupil knows how to adapt their driving when driving in fog. I'd recommend you get lots of practice using coaching questions and having coaching discussions when you are teaching your pupils. Over time, you will improve at this through a process of practice, self-reflection and self-improvement. It might feel a bit awkward to start with, but with time and experience, it will become easier. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. Let me know in the comments if you did. Please like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate this. And do remember, when you're teaching pupils, keep it simple and enjoy it.